Simone de Beauvoir said, "One is not born a woman, but rather becomes it." You've probably heard this line before. It's one of the most famous lines in all of feminist history. And the most popular interpretation is that we might be born with certain physical characteristics, like a biological sex, but we're not born knowing that girls are supposed to wear pink and fawn over boy bands, or that boys are supposed to play with Tonka trucks, or like, what are boys into nowadays? Fortnite? Play Fortnite. Instead, society teaches us certain roles and we grow into them. But today's question is this: is it really a simple A to B process? Is there ever a point where you finally cross the female finish line and grab your woman card and tell the camera you're going to Disney World? Or to use de Beauvoir's words, do you ever stop becoming woman or man?
We tend to think that a 5-year-old boy and a 50-year-old man are the same gender. I think that phrasing comes very naturally to us. But if we try to actually explain what that means, it's difficult to identify many features that they have in common. They don't dress the same way. They don't perform the same social role. They probably do not have the same subjective experience of their genders. They're not physically very similar, even if they're both cisgender. So the thing that unites them in that judgment of them being the same gender is that we expect that the boy will become something like the man, and we expect that the man used to be something like the boy.
We'll get back to that in a second. Hey, I'm Teddy, and I've been thinking a lot recently about gender in time, in part because I've been reading the research of Jake Beardsley, philosophy scholar and friend of the show. And when I say friend of the show, it's me, I'm the show. In this video, Jake and I will explore why your gender isn't as static as you think it is, explain why that matters, and then propose to you a new way of thinking about your gender with 2 new terms. So let's get back to the boy and the man. We tend to think, well, these two are very clearly the same gender, but that actually reveals a lot about our assumptions about gender in the first place.
Most cisgender people perceive their genders in what I would call a naive way. There's being this static nature of it, this continuity from, when I was a little boy, when I was a young man, and now when I'm a middle-aged man. But trans people problematize these predictions since, of course, sometimes the person who occupies the 5-year-old boy role will occupy the 50-year-old woman role. If we seriously understand trans experiences, then it reveals some things which have actually been true about everyone all the time. Gender does not have this static nature. It's not really possible to have a static gender over the course of 80 years of your life. All we can really have are these disparate parts that we then unify with a mental narrative. And that narrative is totally fine. It's a totally legitimate thing to do, but it's more similar to trans experiences than I think cis people tend to realize. I think cis allies tend to think that their genders are simple and static, and then trans people's identities are more complicated and they involve change. So there's the jumping over from one track to another. But really, I think that all gender has this dynamic nature. It's not that trans people change and cis people stay the same. It's that everyone's genders are changing, and some changes are socially approved and others are not approved.
So the question becomes, how can you describe your gender if it is so fluid over time? This may come as a shocker, but it's often an easier process for cis people than for trans people. Often for cis people, it is a one-word process. You can say, I'm a man, or I'm a woman. And if you feel pretty comfortable with the past and the future that those words describe, then it's pretty easy to go ahead and use those words. But if someone doesn't follow one of these normalized gendered paths, then the terms man and woman might not explain everything that you feel about your gendered past or your gendered future. So what do you do if you find yourself in that case? Well, there are a few options. The first is to start bending the language.
You might get people who describe their gender in very squishy terms that are very emotional, and that's perfectly fine. They're expressing themselves in a way that is useful.
Before comedian Eddie Izzard fully identified as a woman, she used to say things like, I feel like a complete boy plus half girl. And if this phrase comes across as maybe paradoxical or irrational, then great. That's kind of the point. Eddie Izzard isn't trying to say that she literally feels like 1.5 people, but it's really trying to say that this kind of language, this figurative language, describes a very deeply emotional feeling. But the problem is that not every space recognizes it. Outside of queer spaces, there's often a presumption that trans people need to prove their identities, that they have to have an airtight, logical explanation for their emotions.
Some people who are transphobic, or at least people who are maybe not quite all the way here with us, I don't want those people to look in and encounter some arguments or some definitions that don't really make sense and to think, is this the best they can do?
You can't expect every queer person to have taken taken gender theory 315 and to whip out a Judith Butler quote on a moment's notice. So that's the point of Jake's research.
What I'm hoping to do, though, is to provide a resource that can help to further unpack and to justify those claims so that there is a stronger formulation available for people who want or need it.
And what's special about this new language is that it has baked into it this idea that gender is supposed to change over time for everyone.
I have these two concepts of sense gender and narrative gender, where sense gender describes somebody's perception of their own gender at some specific moment, whereas narrative gender describes the perception of their gender over time. So like, what is important about my past, present, and future? What is the through line? Somebody has a sense gender at a specific time if the historical concepts of man or woman are integral to their sense of self at that time. And it could also be that you are not sure how you ought to identify. So maybe you're in a period of questioning. You're like, am I a man? Am I a woman? Am I non-binary? You still have a sense gender because you're situating yourself relative to those concepts. To have a narrative gender is to view your past or your future, or probably both, in light of your current sense gender or your gender identity. Because of my gender identity, I view certain events from my past as being important to who I am now, or they resonate with who I am now, or they foreshadow who I am now. Some trans women have experiences like getting in trouble for using mommy's makeup when they were 5. If a little boy who grows up into a man did that, that might just fade away as like a memory of something he did one day. But for a trans woman, that might be like a very, very salient memory. Like, oh geez, that really foreshadowed the next 30 years of my life, huh? These past events can also include things that happened before you were born. So just historical events that you identify with, like women who strongly relate to feminist causes, feminist movements from before they were born, gay people who identify with the AIDS movement or with Stonewall. Those are all things that shape our experiences of ourselves and which are rooted in the past. So I call all of those things having a gender past. To have a gender future is to understand your future through the lens of your current sense gender. That could mean either that you make predictions about the future based on your current sense gender. So most 20-year-old men will perceive themselves as being like older men and eventually like old men in the future. Straight men will perceive that, you know, I'm gonna have my first girlfriend and then I'm gonna have more girlfriends, I'm gonna have a fiance, I'm gonna have a wife, and so on. And of course, for trans people, this could also be the expectation of I'm going to transition, I'm going to be a year on hormones, and then I'm going to be 10 years on hormones, and I'm going to be an old woman, and so on.
Thank you, Jake. These terms, sense gender and narrative gender, come with the assumption that your gender is supposed to change over the course of your lifetime, and that's something normal and even good. That isn't to say that you're going to switch between labels of man and woman every day, but it's really to say that these labels already contain multitudes and change over the course of a person's life. When we recognize the fluid nature of everyone's gender, we help destigmatize trans identities and really create spaces that are more open for everyone. And maybe on a more personal level, when we really stop and think about how our gender is important to us and how that's changed over time, we end up learning a lot about ourselves. If you enjoyed this video, please check out Jake's paper. I have the link in the description. It goes into all sorts of topics that I couldn't even begin to talk about here. It's a really fascinating read. And if you like this video, please share it with a friend and give it a like, because the algorithm. I also have a Patreon page where you can support me monthly and get access to videos early and other exclusive content. So keep an eye out for that. And lastly, if you like this video, I think you'll also like my video I made about why race doesn't exist in France. It also talks about language and how it shapes the way we think about social justice. So I'll see you over there.